Not here, but she is because she's on FaceTime right now. Or she was on. Oh, hi, Trace. Oh, thanks, Sophie. Well, thank you all for having me here today. It's a great honor and privilege to get to speak on something that's so dear to my heart, something that's so relevant for the church today. Mental health. It really saddens my heart to hear that there were 6 young lives lost this past year here in this city. Just really breaks my heart because most of y'all don't know me, but I've walked that path. I've had my own journey with mental health, and I think that's why it's a bit nerve-wracking for me to speak here today, just because I was saved here. This was a place of refuge for me. This was where I got to meet God, where I got to join a scandalous table. Ricky and Jane, thank you so much for taking me in straight out of a psychiatric ward into your home, then letting me marry your daughter. I don't know what's more scandalous. Oh. God is good, isn't he? And his redeeming grace is so powerful. And I believe that mental health is something that God is wanting to redeem in our society, but he's also wanting to redeem it in the church. So often when the subject of mental health comes up, it's very stigmatized. It's very brushed under the table, especially if you're a man. It's not manly to cry. It's not manly to feel low. It's not manly to express the emotions that sometimes or oftentimes we feel. Well, I'm here to break that stigma. All right? I guess before I get into all of this, teaching on mental health, I know we have some slides going up. I'm an academic, so I do apologize. You will be getting a lecture today. But there's also some deep truths within this lecture, truths that go beyond cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the modality that I utilize. It's the type of therapy that I utilize in my day job in England. But like I said before, I wanted to go on to that. I just wanted, Ricky, you said something that was hitting me in the last service, or at the end of the last service. You said something that was already resonating in my spirit about the theme thus far in this conference. The theme thus far in this conference has been about identity. And that is so relevant in today's age. We're living in a world of wokeism, in a world where if there's any sort of confusion, you're told who you are. And I think that this conference is very timely because, church, we need to hear this. We need to hear who we are. We heard about being sons, that we are all sons. We're not sheep. We don't want to be sheep. We want to be sons. And then we heard that we are the communion. That we are communion. We're the holy, eternal communion that God has. And every time we give of ourselves, we're giving a bit of Jesus. When we hand out the bread of life to others, man, that's a powerful thing. Steve, thank you. I don't know if you're here, but thank you for that message. That really hit me, and I'm going to be chewing on that for a while. And then we heard this morning, dear Carolyn, what a powerful, powerful word. We're the voice of God. Do you guys realize that? We're the voice. We are sons. We are communion. And we are the voice of God in this world right now. That is who we are. Now, what I'm going to be talking to you about when it comes to mental health and the struggles that you might deal with, the struggles that honestly all of us deal with at some point in our lives. I want you to know that you are not these struggles. These are things that might happen to you along the way, but they don't define you. Your struggles do not define you. Depression, anxiety, stress, it does not define who you are in the kingdom of God. Does it happen? Yes, it's part of the human condition. We live in a fallen world, but it does not have to define who you are. So I guess going into church and mental health, it's probably good to know a little bit about me. Maybe what qualifies me to even be up here, other than being a son of the house. I am the lead psychological well-being practitioner for the West London NHS Trust. That's the national healthcare system there in London. I sit on a board of the Psychological Professions Network for all of London, helping to make decisions. So academically, certifically, I'm qualified. I'm a qualified clinician to instruct you on these matters. But going back, I also had that lived experience. I know what it's like to be on the other side of it, and I'm not scared to admit it. I know what it's like to be broken. I know what it's like to have no hope. I know what it's like to not know what tomorrow is going to bring because all you want to do is die. But more importantly, I know hope now. I know Jesus now. I know who I am. I'm still finding out who I am, but I know who I am. And though my healing happened miraculously right there, back in 2009, March 2009, right there. Ricky made me sit on the front row with him. I was wanting to sit on the back row. Thank you. I was healed, but I also want you to know that I am still being healed. It is something that happened and is happening. And yes, it happened through the power of God, but it is also happening and still happens through the wisdom that God gives men and women to speak into our life. We have mental health professionals that are equipped to help us, and they do a good job most of the time. We have our pastors. We have the elders in the church. We have our brothers and sisters in Christ. We're not alone in these struggles. We are not alone. And every single person in this room, at some point in their life, has felt depressed, has felt anxious, has been overworked, underpaid, stressed to the max. So we all can identify what it's like to walk through these issues, though our issues are very personal and they look different for each and every one of us. We all know what it's like. So church and mental health. Oh, there we go. So I guess for the aims today, again, here's the academic coming out in me. First and foremost is to unravel and dispel the shame that is often felt by those suffering with depression and anxiety, which are the most common mental health difficulties that are out there today. It's also to inform you as a church about these conditions so that we can destigmatize what has been stigmatized, because it's normal. I want you all to know that it is normal to go through periods in your life where you're depressed or you're anxious. It's abnormal to stay there, but it's normal to feel. God made you an emotive person. Express those emotions. Express them. Lastly, I want to equip you, at least in the very most minimal of ways to be able to help yourself, maybe help your friend. If you're a pastor, help somebody in your church with just some guided self-help interventions. That's what we call them. But it's just methods. And I was reflecting with Ricky on some of these methods, maybe a few months back. And I said, you know, Ricky, the more and more I get to know about my field and about the interventions which I use, the more I come to realize that they are biblically based. There's nothing new under the sun. Nothing new. I don't even know if the people who wrote these interventions were Christians or not, but man, what they wrote is awfully Christian. So that's what I want to do today. So I guess I like to be very interactive, so I'm going to ask you some questions. All right, please don't let me sit up here in silence, because I'm a good therapist and I like to use the silence to make you uncomfortable. So when we say mental health, what do we mean by that? Mental clarity, okay. Emotional stability. Balance of emotion and logic. You're not going crazy, okay. Anyone else? Coping with stress, absolutely. Trauma, yep. Yep. Discerning reality from delusion, okay. Yeah, these are all not wrong answers. So what are some of the emotions that are evoked when somebody says or starts talking about mental health? Fear? It's a big one. Shame, ignorance, anxiety. Yeah. I wonder why that is. Yeah. A lot of the times we don't know what to do. But you see, a lot of the answers that you guys gave were very similar. Why? Because it's been stigmatized. We've been told not to feel this way. We've been told, hey, you know what? We're Christian. We can't feel this way. We have a powerful God who can set us free, and that is truth. But it's also true that we go through trials and tribulations. Jesus promised it. So whenever I talk with my clients, one of the things that I say is, when it comes to mental health, it's not a one-size-fits-all term. As you heard, we had a range of answers come out when we talked, what is mental health? A range of answers. And the truth is, that's why it wasn't wrong. It's because it's not a one-size-fits-all type of term. If we go to the next slide, there we go. Oh, it's working now. I tell my clients that if you think about mental health as being on a continuum or a slide scale, on one end, we have suffering. On the other end, we have thriving. And moment by moment, each and every day, we have various factors that are pulling at us, causing us to move back and forth, from thriving to suffering, from suffering to thriving, each and every moment of each and every day. It only becomes problematic when we stop moving towards the thriving side and we only start staying on the suffering side, and we can't seem to get out of that suffering side, and we're sitting there maybe bouncing back and forth between 1 and 2 or even 1 and 3. But to move from suffering to thriving, from thriving to suffering, that's okay. That's called life. Because you have so many different things that impact on you. So many different things that pull at you. So what impacts our mental health? What causes us to slide from thriving to suffering and suffering to thriving? Well, we have biological factors. This is how your body's made up. Hormones, your health and well-being. Are you sick? Are you stressed? You have those psychological factors that pull at you. The way we think, the way we've been taught to think, how our worldview or our schema has been formed throughout our life. Our own perceived ability to cope. How many times have you heard somebody say, or maybe how many times have you said, I can't cope? I've said it, I'm guilty. I say it from time to time, and I'm a therapist. Those factors pull at you too. You have your social factors. These factors include relationships, intimate relationships, platonic relationships. Those are pulling at you. A big one, work relationships. Who remembers COVID? Ooh. All of a sudden, we had to learn how to work remotely. The government telling us, hey, isolate yourself. Isolate yourself. As a therapist, I hate that word. It is one of the biggest risk factors we look for is isolation. Isolate yourself. Isolate yourself. Go back to work. Go back to work. Get back in the office. Deal with these people you haven't dealt with in 2.5 years. Man, that's definitely pulling at you. Here's another one, environmental factors. And I'm not talking about climate change, even though climate change does fall in there. Where we live. Do we live out in the countryside where it's quiet? Or do we live right next to the railroad where a train goes by every 15 minutes? I don't know if it's that much anymore, but what is it like where we live? Hot? Hot, look at the next one. Hot climate, cold climate. There's a difference. There's a difference in people and how they cope with their mental health depending on climate. It's quite interesting. There's a lot of materials out there on that. But what I'm saying about what's it like where we live, do you want to go home? What's it like in your house? Is it a healthy environment or is it a hostile environment? That goes with the social factors as well. See, these things, there we go. These things pull back and forth at us each and every day, moment by moment. Yes, Pamela? And that would fall under environmental or social, depending on the context that you would look at it. If you're at war, it could fall under social and environmental. If, unfortunately, you were the victim of some sort of attack, it could be an environmental factor. Where were you at? But yeah, traumas falls within underneath the biopsychosocial environmental scale. A lot of times people hear of the biopsychosocial, we tend to leave out the environmental side of things as well. It's very important. The point that I'm trying to make here is we all suffer, and we all suffer through periods of depression and anxiety. That doesn't mean that we stay there, but I want you to raise your hand in here if you've never felt low in your life. Low, depressed. I want you to raise your hand if you've never felt anxious, and it might make you feel anxious me asking this question. We all suffer. It's part of the human condition. And I want you to know it's okay. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to feel low at times. Just don't stay there. So, being an academic, I had to throw in some literature. It wouldn't be a good talk without some good literature. So, the SAMHSA, or Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, stated in a report from 2020, pre-COVID, that 1 in 5 adults in the United States suffer from some form of mental illness. That is 20% of the population of the United States. So I'm not even going worldwide here, I'm just talking about the States. So by that, 1 in 5 people in this room might be feeling a bit low or anxious at this point in time. And that's okay. You're not alone. A further report, this one's a bit older, from 2012, Rogers, Stanford, and Garland, revealed that 27% of people attending Protestant churches have some form of mental illness within their immediate family. So you may not be suffering, but somebody in your family might be. In your immediate family at that. That's 1 out of every 3.7 people. So, in this room, 1 out of every 3.7 of us has somebody in our immediate family dealing with some mental health issues. That's staggering. Those numbers are staggering. And I bet you the reports are still waiting to fully come out. Those numbers have increased. COVID, the state of the world that we live in, Ukraine, wokeism, everything. It just seems like the world's in turmoil right now, isn't it? And it's always in our face. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How can you say that mental illness is 20% of the United States? Because you don't have a definition of mental health.
They have definitions of depression, they have definitions of anxiety, there's diagnostic criteria that people meet. So whenever we say these numbers, we're saying these are people that have been diagnosed. Okay. So I know it's hard. I honestly went back and forth if I was to bring up the DSM-5, which is a diagnostic material that we utilize, or the ICD-10. I'm a psychologist. I don't like to diagnose. I formulate, which means I work with the client to come up with what they're struggling through. It's not my job to tell you what you're dealing with.
So if it's just from the diagnostic tools we use, that means the number
Could be a lot more.
could be much higher.
Absolutely. It's hard to write reports on what we don't know. But that's the people that have been diagnosed. It could be a lot more. Couldn't be less though, because there's at least that many people. Wow, I don't know what happened to this slide. Something happened. Okay, well, mental health struggles are very commonplace within the church. But we need to address it with empathy, understanding, and a whole lot of grace. Who knows what it is to empathize? Yeah?
Try to put yourself in their position.
Is that empathy or sympathy?
Empathy, would that be feeling what they're feeling?
Just trying to understand maybe how they feel and recognizing that you don't? What about my counselors? Anybody want to take a stab at empathy? good question. I think empathy, you can show compassion without, I got to think about that one. It's good. I mean, compassion is really good. When you empathize, you don't try to put yourself in their position, but you recognize that they're feeling. I think compassion flows out of empathy.
Well, I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
like, I'm a feeler, so I'm really high in empathy, so that's how I define empathy.
Yeah.
Just that you feel it,
Yeah.
like, so that
Yeah.
you have compassion on that.
Yeah. Okay.
Would it be, I think if you're, have empathy, you're a good listener, you're really listening and tuned and connected with that person,
Yes.
really doing everything you can to hear
Absolutely.
what it is they're actually saying.
Active listening, 100%. Yeah.
To me, it would be removing my feelings and thoughts totally me and allowing understanding what you're going through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What? Say it again. I said to me, it would be totally removing my feelings and under what I want, and to totally understand your side and your view, so that you could know and understand that, so I wouldn't be impressing what I'm wanting. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. We can never fully understand what somebody's going through. We can listen, be attentive to their feelings, recognize their feelings. But we don't need to fully understand what they're going through, because it's very personal to them. And even if you try to put yourself in their shoes, you would react totally differently, maybe, than they would react.
Even if you've gone through the exact same experience.
Even if you went through the exact same experience. Absolutely. We don't need to go through that.
Is the
Yeah.
suicides that have happened in the high schools here,
Mm-hmm.
nobody's listening? Is that what's the- Or they're not
I'm not here, so I don't.
willing to talk about it so that people can listen?
So he just asked the question with the suicides here. What's happened with it? Is there nobody listening? Is there nobody that they can talk to? Jason?
We got this thing that's coming up here in Houston and Cherokee called equip, or not equip, loss. What's the other one, Jane? Yeah, well, anyway, we got a suicide team and we're welcoming people to join this team. Once we get everything settled and going, we'll be reaching out to the churches and local businesses to help. It's to be there for the teenagers, it's for the adults. There's 2.5 kids within Anderson and Cherokee County that either commit or go to or get hospitalized weekly with depression, anxiety, problems that happen
Wow.
in school. There's nothing there. So the company that I represent has got this team. It's called Spark. The Spark and Loss team. So
Yeah.
eventually I'll have the paperwork and be inviting people to join this as a community to help out.
That's awesome.
There is a need.
Yeah. So what Jason just said, for those who maybe didn't hear, is there's a team that's being created called Spark. That it's a suicide prevention hotline team.
Yeah, it's a team.
Yeah.
We'll eventually have a number you can call.
Yeah.
Have
So eventually,
certain teams
yeah.
that work with children, certain teams work with teenagers, adults, like that.
Several of the kids that did end up taking their lives were, you didn't see the signs. They suffered in silence
Mm-hmm.
because they're too ashamed to say, I'm feeling so much pressure, I'm feeling so much
Yeah.
anxiety. So it was a shock for a couple of them because we didn't
Yeah. Well, and that's a whole nother thing is maybe the city needs to come up with a suicide prevention policy and see about addressing that. First and foremost, Spark would be a hotline, a team for people to be able to talk to in a moment of crisis, because you never know when that crisis will happen.
It's also to train the people to visually
Yeah.
hear the signs of someone that's actually suffering.
Yeah.
And we have 3 different classes that we will have. They're all free. You just have to show up.
There you go. So opportunities here, folks.
Zach, what is empathy?
Empathy. Empathizing, to empathize by definition would be to to listen, to be attentive to one's feelings, to recognize them with a non-judgmental attitude, and to respect. Yes, to respect, 100%. So, launching off of all of that, we're going to go in, because I know that my time's ticking away.
Before you leave, empathy, talk about the difference between that and sympathy.
Difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy, you're trying to put yourself into their shoes. Sympathizing, feeling sorry. Empathy is more powerful than sympathy.
So it's like compassion versus pity.
Yeah. That was a good one. Yes, sir.
Isn't empathy kind of understanding what someone else is going through because you've gone through it firsthand? You know what I'm saying? Empathy versus sympathy.
Yeah.
Empathy, I can empathize with someone that is,
It-
depressed or anxious, because I've had to deal with it personally myself.
That would be more sympathy.
Versus someone being sympathetic to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I think the difference is when you relate
Mm-hmm.
based on your firsthand experience.
Empathy is being able to listen, to respect, to try to understand, but you're not going to fully understand what somebody's gone through.
Because everyone responds differently to the
Yeah.
same situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. We could talk more about that. I could do a whole maybe lesson on that. Honestly, what I've done is I've taken 6 different lectures and I've put them into an hour and a half, maybe, if I'm lucky.
You can be empathetic and not necessarily sympathetic.
Absolutely. My slides are going crazy. I want to go back. Forward. There we go. Good. All right, so diving into the meat of things. Depression. All right, so I'm gonna talk you through depression, and I'm gonna talk you through anxiety. And the reason I'm gonna talk you through depression and anxiety is because I think it's important for you to understand what the symptoms are, to understand a little bit about depression and anxiety, so that way we can maybe recognize if we're going through it ourselves, or recognize if somebody that we love and care for are going through it.
Does this address clinical depression?
Clinical depression. And so in order for it to be classified clinical depression, this is going to that diagnostic criteria that I'm trying to stay away from, it means you have to have one or more of these symptoms for a period of 2 or 3 weeks without it going away. And then what do you mean by clinical depression? Because there's different types. You have dysthymia, yeah. I don't think that's necessarily as important as understanding what the symptoms are. All right, the only reason that they have the diagnostic criteria is to be able to diagnose to bill insurance companies. I'm the big bad wolf in the room. It's okay. That's
One of my understandings of clinical depression is that you're feeling so low it interrupts your daily functioning. It changes how you would function that day. And we can all be low, but it may not change our activities that day. But if you get really low, you can decide not to go somewhere, not to do something. I'm not even going to get dressed today.
Yep.
Then you're getting
And I'm actually talking about both. So whenever I talk about depression, I'm talking about feeling low. I'm talking about, you might be a functioning depressed person, or you might be clinically depressed. All right, so when we talk about depression, I want you to understand that it is one of the most common mental health difficulties, and actually, everyone will experience symptoms at one or more points in their life, whether you are functioning or non-functioning, feeling low, depressed. So those common symptoms are low mood, reduced enjoyment of activities, withdrawal from social activities, loss of energy, feelings of hopelessness, difficulty sleeping, feeling tired all the time, changes in appetite or weight that can go both ways, overeating, undereating, gaining too much weight, losing a lot of weight, low libido, difficulty concentrating, difficulties with mental clarity, not being able to concentrate. Those are all signs of, or common symptoms of depression. Joel, if we slide over. But what causes these? What causes us to feel this way? Well, honestly, there's a variety of reasons why someone might become depressed or might feel low. And many are highly, highly personal. What that means is what might make me feel low might not make you feel low. Whenever I feel low, I might feel tired all the time. I might not eat. When you feel low, it might look completely different. You might not be able to think. You might withdraw completely, retreat into yourself. Some people, when they're depressed, they act outwardly. A lot of people act inwardly. Our mood and belief in our ability to cope are influenced, like I said, by our genes, coping styles, early experiences in life, other life events, and the availability of support. These all affect our mood. And what we know is that the factors that maintain depression might not even be the factors that triggered the depression in the first place. In other words, you might started feeling depressed after a breakdown in relationship, but that might not be what's maintaining it today. What starts it doesn't have to keep it. It doesn't necessarily mean that's what keeps it going. And when people are depressed, the patterns of thinking about themselves, about others, and the world around them can actually further maintain the symptoms of depression. You know, you can see yourself, other people, situations. People that are depressed often see themselves, other people, and the situations in their lives and their future in an overly pessimistic way. They don't see it as positive as they should. They tend to think negatively. They get caught up in these negative automatic thoughts, these negative thinking styles that impact on their life. That further serves to maintain the depression. So what keeps depression going? So in my modality, I was going to talk about it earlier, but it's not as important. The modality that I do is cognitive behavioral therapy, specifically low-intensity cognitive behavioral therapy, and we look at the relationship between our thoughts, our behaviors, and our feelings, both physical feelings and emotional feelings. Because the way we think and behave impacts on the way we feel, right? The way we think affects our behaviors and our feelings. The way we behave affects our thinking and our feelings. The way we feel affects our behaviors and our thinking. They all feed off of each other, and we tend to get caught up in what we call a vicious cycle. A vicious cycle of thinking, behaving, and feeling a certain way, and we go round and round and round, and it seems very hard to get out. And so here in a bit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you some methods on how to combat that, how to break that vicious cycle. But what keeps the depression going? And like I said, it can be maintained by the way that we view ourselves and the world around us, our perceived ability to cope. And we know that what is keeping the depression going may not be what triggered it in the first place. Go back to yeah. So a person's thoughts, feelings, behaviors, how they physically feel, they're all linked, like I said, and that could lead to that development of that vicious cycle. However, what I want you to know is if you make one positive change, or if you change in a positive way, one of those areas is going to impact positively on the others. That's what tells us in CBT. I recognize there's other modalities learned in the room, and those are very important as well. So is it possible to overcome depression? Yes. Yes, it is. A person's thoughts, emotions, and behaviors and how they feel physically, like I said, they're all linked with each other, and they can feel quite hopeless at times. But it is possible to overcome depression. You see, as those thoughts, those feelings, and behaviors and emotions that we all go through, they're all linked. And making changes in our behaviors and thinking process influences and changes how we feel. Developing skills to help you adapt the way that you feel will help you deal with your thoughts and behaviors, and it'll help you gain control over the depression. And it's also very biblical, but like I said, we'll get into that here in a bit. Let's move on to anxiety quickly. I said anxiously. You guys asked a lot of hard questions. But I like it. It'll get you thinking. So what is anxiety? Yeah, it is. Worry, tension, stress, panic. These are all various terms to use for anxiety. And there are actually different types of anxiety. You have generalized anxiety. You have panic. You have stress. Obsessive compulsive disorder is a form of anxiety. Phobias are forms of anxiety. Anxiety is normal as well. How many people know that anxiety is supposed to be helpful? Yeah? Anxiety is supposed to be helpful. How can that be, Zach? How can anxiety be helpful when I feel like hell, when I'm anxious? Let me give you an example. You're driving on the way to work. Somebody's fence come down. There's a road full of cattle. They're not budging. But you know you have to be at work in 5 minutes, and you're about 6 minutes away. What do? Honk your horn? Drive around?
Pull out your shotgun.
Pull out the shotgun? Yeah? What is that called? Problem solving. You solve the problem. Anxiety makes us aware of a problem and helps us solve it. It can become disordered if, in most situations in life, you're feeling the effects of anxiety and there's nothing to solve. So what happens when you become anxious, I'm gonna get really geeky here, I'm sorry. It's not in the slides. Is the amygdala portion of your brain perceives a threat to your life. So what then happens is your body's flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. All right, 2 hormones. Adrenaline comes up from the kidneys, right? And what happens when that adrenaline hits your body? That's the fight or flight. That's right. When adrenaline hits your body, it's meant to help you run faster if you need to flee the situation. Maybe it gives you a bit more extra strength if you need to fight. There's another thing that it can do. It can cause you to freeze. So we now call it the fight, flight, or freeze, because some people go catatonic and don't know what to do. But if you're not having to flee, if you're not having to fight, and you have all this hormone that's giving you the extra ability to do that, it's coursing through your veins and you're not utilizing it, it doesn't feel very nice. You might feel shaky. You might feel an upset stomach. You might sweat. You might feel like your heart's pounding out of your chest. You might feel like somebody's grabbing your throat. You might feel like you're having a heart attack. You might feel like you're going to pass out. But you're not. It's a natural chemical response in your body to a perceived threat. Your brain's tricking yourself. Okay? But going back to the slides, the common symptoms of, not depression, anxiety, Zach, that churning feeling in your stomach, feeling lightheaded, dizzy, pins and needles. I get that. Pins and needles, my hands, my feet. Feeling restless or unable to be still. Headaches, backaches, other aches and pains. Trouble breathing. Irregular heartbeat, sweating, hot flushes, sleep disturbances, grinding your teeth, nausea, needing the toilet more often than less. Changes in your libido again. Feelings of panic. That's all caused by that adrenaline in your body. If you just wait, it'll subside. 30 minutes, 45 minutes. It'll eventually subside. But we tend to have what we call safety behaviors or avoidant behaviors when we feel anxious, because nobody likes to feel like that. So we either get on our phones or do something else that makes us feel more comfortable, or we just leave the situation, which further maintains that anxiety and those symptoms. Joel, go over. So what keeps the anxiety going? A person's thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and how they physically feel, just like depression, they're all linked. Anxiety keeps going because of that vicious cycle of the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors and physical symptoms that we all feel. If we have negative thoughts about something, this can trigger anxious emotions, physical symptoms, and influence the way that we behave. Sometimes, even the thought about going into a situation can cause us great anxiety. So you don't even have to be there. You can just think about it, and your brain will be like, fight or flight. Yeah. But it's important to know that understanding these vicious cycles occur when we're anxious, and it helps us to actually be able to identify what we can do to break it. And we'll get into that here in just a bit. Is it possible to overcome anxiety? Just like depression, yes. God has given us the ability to cope, even if we feel like we can't. Sometimes we just need a little help from a friend or a therapist or both. Anxiety can affect anyone at any given time, and it's not possible to remove anxiety from your life. I wish it was, but it would be most unhelpful to remove anxiety from your life. It would be most unhelpful. Why? Because it's normal and it's a helpful emotion. It's normal and it's helpful if you know how to harness it. And you don't let it impact your life to the point where you stop living. There's no quick fix when it comes to anxiety. just like there's no quick fix when it comes to depression. But understanding your anxiety and what keeps it going, understanding your thinking processes, understanding your behaviors will help you find out how to fix it. Again, we're going to dive into that just a bit. Joel? So, Zach, you're at a church talking about depression and anxiety. Where do we see it in the Bible? Psalms. Oh, David. David was depressed, wasn't he? So I'm going to give you an example of where it's at in the Bible. Joel? No, go back. There you go. It's throughout the entire Bible. The entire Bible. From when Adam and Eve knew that they messed up and realized their nakedness, they became anxious and had to clothe themselves with fig leaves. To Job and his friends. I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to. I'm sorry, Ricky. I don't think Job's friends were actual friends. I think Job's friends were up here. And what I mean by that is, how often do we have that inner dialogue with ourselves that's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth? How many of us entertain our friends?
I have a lot of voices. I got more friends than Job.
Some of us entertain Job's friends all the time. All right? It's throughout the Bible. Going to David, depressed David. Oh, man. But he didn't stay there. He might have visited that place often, but he never stayed. Because he knew how to posture himself. Jesus. Fully God, yet fully man. Did Jesus feel? Did Jesus express his emotions? He allowed himself to. Did he not weep at the news of his friend's death? When he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, knowing the guards were coming to get him, knowing what was about to happen, he sweat blood. Do you know that that's actually a clinical thing? I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but it is. I'll find out for you later. Yeah, John 12:27. Yeah. My soul is troubled, agitated, anxious. He allowed himself to feel. Why? Because he knew that he had to be fully human and to go through and allow himself to feel as we feel. It doesn't make you weak to feel down. It doesn't make you weak to be anxious. It makes you human. So, what time are we at? We got time? Okay. You guys okay? Yeah. Sorry, I tend to ramble. I love this though. So, depression and anxiety. What can we do about it? Well, depression and anxiety usually affects the way that we behave. And we tend to withdraw. We tend to have a reduction in behaviors that being activities that we used to enjoy, maybe activities that are routine, such as waking up, getting out of bed, getting dressed, brushing your teeth, having self-care. These could be necessary activities, such as paying bills, going to work, doing things that are necessary in life in order to function. So, we usually have a withdrawal from these activities. And this might be because of the negative thoughts you have about doing the things, or you just might not feel like getting out of bed. You might just feel tired all the time. So you stop doing these things. You stop having fun. You stop seeing your friends. You stop going to church. You stop going to work. Stop paying your bills. And what happens? You're more problems, which impacts more on how you feel. Absolutely. Withdrawing from those activities can reduce the opportunity that you have to experience feelings of pleasure. It can reduce the opportunity for you to achieve something. So there's two things that happen, there's many things that happen, but two of the things that we say is pleasurable activities and routine and activities where you achieve something helps to release various hormones in your body, such as serotonin, norepinephrine. Doing it with somebody you love helps. It causes your body to release oxytocin. These aren't things that make you happy, but they do help keep you happy. Which is why most drug companies out there say you need to be on this SSRI or that SSRI. Well, the SSRI, it essentially what it does is it slows your body down from reuptaking the serotonin. So your body's released serotonin into your system. Theoretically, it's supposed to make you happy. It doesn't make you happy. And that medication, what it does is then it slows your body from reabsorbing it down. And so there's more serotonin in your system longer. It's a lie. If you want more serotonin, start having activities. If you want to be happier, start doing the things that's going to bring you pleasure. Do something fun. Oh, I don't feel like it. Well, I don't feel like doing a lot all the time. But once you do it, you feel better. Anybody ever not wanted to go on a run before they went on a run? But after the run, don't you feel better? Call an ambulance. Yeah, I got it over with. Or how many people have ever said, I really don't want to go out with my friends tonight. I just feel tired. I want to stay home. But you end up going out with your friends and you feel a lot better after. Right? Having fun goes a long way. Or, I really should clean that room out. Junk's just been piling up in there for a long time. Just put it off. And every time you walk past it, it's nagging at you. If you finally clean it, you feel a lot better, don't you?
Sure do.
See, increasing activity really helps. And depression and anxiety has a massive effect on the types of activities that we do, really causing us to withdraw from those activities. So one of the main interventions that we utilize within my type of therapy is called behavioral activation. And the reason that we do that is because inactivity actually can make the symptoms of depression or anxiety seem worse. And it's important not to put off doing things until you feel better, but to start doing them now. So introducing activities in manageable steps can actually help to lift some of those symptoms of depression and anxiety off of you. And it's important that you have some activities that give you a sense of pleasure and some activities that give you a sense of achievement for the reasons that I said before. So try to think of the activities in your life that have changed since you started feeling depressed or anxious. Have you seen family and friends less? Have you stopped doing your hobbies? Have you stopped making time for yourself? Are you putting things off? Are you putting homework off if you're in school? Are you putting off paying your bills? Are you putting off finding a new job if your current job is not helping you pay those bills? Ask yourself these questions. What have I put off? What have I put off? And then what you'll do is list those activities. All right, it's helpful to make a list. List those activities that you're no longer doing or that you're doing less. All right, and try to put them in some sort of hierarchy, right? What's most enjoyable to what I still like to do, but maybe it's not the top thing on my list. Make a hierarchy. Look at that list. Give it that hierarchy. And even maybe look and break down that list. Well, these were pleasurable. These were routine. Maybe I'm not getting out of bed. Maybe I'm not brushing my teeth. Maybe I'm not cleaning house or cooking for myself. And maybe some of the necessary activities. And on your list, identify those, right? Cool. Next slide. Yep. And then list out some steps on how you can reintroduce these activities in a manageable way. Right? Pick one of the activities that you would like to do more of or get back to doing and put that one first. We usually say, start with the pleasurable activities and the necessary activities. Okay? And then what you're going to do is you're going to make a plan. Man, CBT therapists love a good schedule. Why? Because it's important. You're more likely to complete an activity if it's written down and it's planned out, and you know at this day, at this time, I've got to do this. Why? Because this is my medication. Like you would take a tablet. Do the activity. And then, at the end of the week, if you realize that maybe you've only done 50% of the activities you planned, that's okay. Have grace with yourself. You did 50% more than you did last week. All right? Reward yourself. So that's behavioral activation. Go back. We'll get into that one in a second. So behavioral activation, just to kind of summarize it, helps with both depression and anxiety. The first thing that you do is you start to recognize, and if you have somebody in your life that you trust, that you feel like you could be vulnerable with, it could be a spouse, it could be a friend, it could be a pastor, it can be a best friend. It doesn't matter. Somebody that you trust and you know that you could be vulnerable with, maybe sit down with them and let them help you make that list. Because sometimes it's hard to think when we're feeling low. Sometimes it's hard to fully see what we're not doing anymore. Make that list. Put it in a hierarchy. And then manageable steps. You don't want to list everything in the first week or second week on that schedule. You're going to burn yourself out. Start with 2-3 items that's on that list and get back to doing them. Biblically, you know what this is called? The concept of repentance. I was doing this, but then I started going this way. I need to go back this way. You need to repent. And it's not because it's sinful, it's just you need to go the other way, which is the concept of repentance. I was going this way, but now I need to go back this way. It's biblical. Now for the second intervention that I will explain and talk us through. Cognitive restructuring. That is the big psychological term we like to use. Thought challenging, man. Thought challenging. That's what it is. This method is it's difficult to do, but it literally rewires your brain. When you do this, it creates new neural synapses in your brain, therefore teaching your brain a new way to think. And at first, you're gonna have to write all this stuff down and do it on pen and paper, or pencil and paper, or on a computer, or an iPad, a tablet, whatever. Why? Because you can't do it automatically. But eventually, your brain will have the new neural pathways that you can do it in an instant. It's amazing how God made our bodies. So, thought challenging. We all have these thoughts about situations that we're in and things that we're doing all the time. These thoughts we have can influence the way we feel without us even realizing it. They can develop into a set of rules which we live by. How many people have ever challenged the way they think? I know this group down here. Yeah. Most people don't think about thinking. Yeah. And some people, they get caught up, say, oh, I shouldn't think that way, and they put all their focus on that thinking, right? When you put all your focus on that thinking, guess what happens? You think that way. So if I tell you to not think about a pink elephant, what are you going to think about? Pink elephant, of course. Why? Because you don't realize that you're having a thought until you've already had the thought. Thoughts are automatic. So what do we do when we have these negative thoughts that are automatic? How do we stop that from occurring? You can't. But what you can do is you can take it captive. Ooh. Take them captive. That's biblical, right? Take your thoughts captive. Who's heard a sermon on how to take your thoughts captive? Awesome. Not many. Is anybody over here? There you go. So 4 people. Taking your thoughts captive. What does that look like? I'm going to teach you, at least from a CBT point of view. All right. So we're not aware of these thoughts when they happen. They're usually fleeting and automatic. We all have unhelpful thoughts. You can't stop them from occurring, right? These thoughts can be destructive if you never challenge them out. They can be impactful, impacting on your life. Impactful. I had it. Okay. Impactful on your life. You know, I think I heard one time, if it's not a sin to have the thought, but if you don't take that thought captive, it becomes a behavior, and the behavior is what's sinful. So you have to take your thoughts captive. You can go to the next slide, Joel. Again. So when we're depressed or anxious, we have those negative thoughts. These types of thoughts are very unfair. You know, they tend to be very pessimistic. Positive events are ignored. Anything positive tends to be completely ignored, or the negative tends to be overemphasized. Depression and anxiety, they tend to be associated with what we call biased ways of thinking, or biased ways of interpreting events and situations. For example, when we're depressed, we think about ourselves in a very critical fashion. We tend to judge ourselves in a very harsh and unfair manner. The negative things we've done are very obvious, but we have difficulty seeing anything positive about ourselves. We tend to see the current situation that we're in a very pessimistic way. and we anticipate the future as being bleak or disappointing. You see, these thoughts can impact on how we feel and how we behave in any situation. So we got to challenge them. Next slide, Joel. And a large part of the CBT, the cognitive part, so CBT stands for cognitive behavioral therapy, is about focusing on these thoughts and looking closely at the negative and unhelpful thoughts to see how true they actually are. And so I'm going to give you a list of some common unhelpful thinking styles, some common biased ways of thinking. That's really small. I tried to blow that up bigger. Don't worry, I have some great materials available for whoever wants them. They can be emailed. So if you want some materials, just give us your email address. We'll email them over to you, okay? These are self-help guides that I have, so you don't have to have a professional walk you through it, okay? So we have this mental filter. This is when you only see the bad and you ignore the good. It's a negative mental filter. We have fortune telling, which is where we make negative predictions about what will happen in the future, and this actually stops us from doing things. We have mind reading, which is when we assume that others are thinking negative thoughts about us or have negative intentions regarding us. We have black and white thinking. This is where we tend to think in extremes rather than in a more balanced way. We have catastrophizing. This is when we interpret a small problem as being a major issue. Overgeneralizing is where you make general conclusions about yourselves or others that, based on one or a few events. You have personalizing, which is where you make everything about you. And you have high inflexible standards and rules, which is the thinking style that you place rigid demands on yourselves, leaving you upset if you're not able to meet those demands. So if we don't challenge the way we think, we tend to fall into one or more of those categories. We tend to have these types of thinking styles. So it's helpful to be able to identify what type of thinking styles you have. And again, it's going to be in the materials. I'm not just going to say, hey, remember this, or if you want the materials, you can come. Give us your email address. Next slide, Joel. So, catching, testing, and changing unhelpful thoughts. So, the first thing that you want to do is you want to identify what unhelpful thoughts you're having. If you're anxious or depressed, and you're having these thoughts of that are unhelpful, oh, I'm no good, nobody likes me, I'm never going to be able to cope with this. Write those down. And it's important to be able to identify what that thought is, and then catch that thought. So that's what that's called, is that catching your thoughts. The next step is to consider the evidence for and against that thought, and eventually identify if there's an alternative thought that is more realistic, helpful, and healthy. So that this whole process is called catching, testing, changing, or thought challenging. So catching, testing, and changing your thoughts takes practice, and it doesn't happen straight away, but try to stick with it, as with time, it will help you to hold more realistic and helpful thoughts. It is one way which you can break the vicious cycle of depression and anxiety and achieve greater emotional well-being. So we've talked you through catching the thoughts. Now it's time to weigh the evidence for and against the thought. So how do you do that, Zach? What do you even mean by weigh the evidence for and against the thought? What I mean is what you're going to do, and again, there's an example coming. Actually, Joel, can you just go to the example? Keep going. Right there. So this is an example of what we call a thought diary. All all right, to thought challenge. You identify the situation that you're in, how it makes you feel. It's important to recognize how you feel in that situation. What the thought is, okay? Evidence for the thought or evidence supports that thought is something that makes the thought that you're having true or realistic. So you try to list all that out. And this example says, I'm due to meet a friend for lunch, but she's very late. Made her feel sad and upset. Her thoughts is, she forgot about me. She doesn't like me. No one likes me. I'm not important. Well, what makes those automatic thoughts real? So real. I'm going to write out. Well, she is never normally late. She would have called me to let me know if she was going to be late. So maybe she just didn't want to be with me, right? Okay, so is there anything else? No, that's the only evidence. So what evidence goes against that thought? Well, she's done a lot of things with me. She actually wanted to come to this lunch. She suggested in the first place. She's invited me out more than once. She often smiles and chats to me. She said that that she's missed seeing me. Something urgent could have come up. So what do you notice about these evidences? Well, there's more evidence against the thought. There's more evidence that doesn't support the thoughts that you're having. And this is normally true for most negative thoughts that we have. There's less evidence that supports the thought than does support it. So, okay, I've done this, Zach. What do we do now? Well, you come up with an alternative thought. And this is where the whole writing process comes down, because it's very important, because if you've never done this before, your brain doesn't work in this way. So writing it down is like hitting print on a printer or on a computer. It takes it, transcribes it down, makes it into the memory, right? And your brain is learning this each and every time, so creating those new neural synapses. So you come up with an alternative thought. So she's a good friend. She'll have a reason for being late. These alternative thoughts are more realistic and helpful. Our negative automatic thoughts tend to be unhelpful and unrealistic and overly biased. So you come up with a new thought. You write that new thought out. And you keep practicing this day in, day out. Writing it down. And one day, you'll find yourself doing this automatically. This is taking your thoughts captive, people. This is taking your thoughts captive. You have to work at it. It's very practical. Very, very practical. Is that it on the slides? Yeah, okay. So we've talked a little bit about what's going on in society, what's going on in the church. We've talked about how prevalent mental health issues are in the U.S. society, in the U.S. church, at least the Protestant denominations. 1 in 5 people, 20% of Americans are struggling, that we know of, with some form of mental illness. 1 out of every 3.7 people within the Protestant denomination churches have somebody in their immediate family dealing with mental health issues. We talked about the most common mental health issues being depression and anxiety, what they are, how we can maybe identify it in ourselves or identify it in others. We've talked about behavioral activation, which is a way to increase activities in your life to overcome symptoms of depression and anxiety. We've talked about how those activities impact on the way we feel and the way we think. We've talked about cognitive restructuring or thought challenging and how we can take our thoughts captive by simply doing a few steps, which takes 15 minutes to do. You're going to be equipped. If you want the materials, like I said, we have materials to be able to email you. I guess my biggest thing here today and why I agreed to do this is because I think it's important in today's age, knowing that we're sons, knowing that we're the communion, knowing that we are the voice of God, but also knowing that we're still at times in our lives going to go through periods where we don't feel good. And that's okay. It's not okay to stay there. We have wonderful professionals at our fingertips that are more than willing to help. We have pastors that are willing to sit down and help. We have friends that are willing to listen and help if they can. We have resources now. Should you need them? Should you want them? It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. What posture are you going to take? Six young lives in this past year. 6 young lives. They need to know the hope that we have. But we also need to know the hope we have. And I laughed when Carolyn came out with poems, because I have a poem that I was going to end with. The British must be rubbing off. Good Timber by Douglas Malloch. The tree that never had to fight for sun and sky and air and light, but stood out in the open plain and always got its share of rain, never became a forest king, but lived and died a scrubby thing. The man who never had to toil to gain and farm his patch of soil, who never had to win his share of sun and sky and light and air, never became a manly man, but lived and died as he began. Good timber does not grow with ease. The stronger wind, the stronger trees. The further sky, the greater length. The more the storm, the more the strength. By sun and cold, by rain and snow, in trees and men, good timber grow. Where thickest lies the forest growth, we find the patriarchs of both. And they hold counsel with the stars, whose broken branches show their scars. Of many winds and much of strife, this is the common law of life. Thank you.
Wow. So good.